tell my story. And so many people have told me they can relate to it and such. And that's real because, like you said, a lot of us are going through the same thing. It just sounds different. It feels different. But once you hear somebody talking about it, you're like, I actually know what that is. Or that, like I'm actually going through the same. Right. Same, sis. Same.
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited. So first of all, we have our really good friend here, Sabine Quetant. Okay, she's also my coworker, but I feel like Sabine, you're one of the people that I admire the most in terms of just you always show up as your whole self, and I value that. I respect that, and you're also just super smart, super creative, and you care. You care about people, you care about things, and you have a voice, and so. I think that this is perfect timing to bring you on the podcast and to just have this conversation. So yes, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I think you two are amazing. I've been following More Juice from the jump. So I am a More Juice OG, I'm claiming it.
You really are.
But yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you ladies.
Dope. So why don't we start? I always like to have our guests just introduce themselves because you can do that the best, So why don't you give us a overview of what your journey has been like? Who is Sabine?
I am a creative. I am a storyteller. I am a visual designer. And yeah, I think I just approach life by trying to find my specific voice in it. I think everyone should kind of do that. So that's kind of why I call myself a storyteller. I am a creative, and that's me.
I love that.
Yep. Accurate.
Right. Very accurate. Very, very accurate. So
we've been talking.
Yeah. I wish, we got some behind the scenes videos we're going to show y'all. But we pretty much had the whole podcast before we were able to record, so.
It'd be like that sometimes.
Practice round.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to tug on that storyteller piece. Okay. So if you had to tell your own story, what would that be?
So my story is a story of my name. It's a story of Sabine, and it's a story of sacrifice. And when I say that, sometimes people get really oh my gosh, they get a little sad. But for me, it's always been a really powerful thing for me. I am a person who will give of myself to others. I will give of myself to anything that I deem necessary, anything that I deem right. And so you talk a little bit about always showing up as myself, and that's a little bit of my sacrifice. I have had to sacrifice things to always show up as myself, whether that's sometimes the respect of other people or, and by that respect, I mean if you don't respect me because I show up as myself, that's not respect I wanted anyway, but sometimes it's coming from people who are important to you in your life, and you have to decide between, okay, do I make this other person happy, or do I show up as myself, as my true self, my whole self? And so there's that. I will sacrifice for my team. I will sacrifice for people I love. Don't come for my friends. Don't come for my family, So that is my story. I have a story of sacrifice, and I own that. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's sad. Sometimes it's lonely. And other times it's amazing and it's joyful and it's full. So yeah, that's my story of sacrifice and story of Sabine.
I have two questions, and you can choose which one you want to answer.
Okay.
What would you say is the biggest sacrifice that you've made, or what was the latest sacrifice that you've made? And they maybe are the same. I don't know.
Right. That's a tough question. Which one do I want to answer? Okay, I'll say the latest sacrifice. The latest one for me has been a sacrifice of ego.
Oh. Wow. Let me take a drink before this.
Yes. Please do. I'm going to take one too because this story.
This is a really important topic of conversation, so I'm ready.
Okay. Yeah, it was a sacrifice of ego because I put in a lot of work. Everything that I do, I put 150 whatever percent into it. That's how I've always been. I'm sort of all or nothing type of person. And so everything that I've done, everything that I have a hand in, I feel really attached to because, I didn't just half-ass it. I really put myself into it. And so recently I made a career shift. I wanted to get back into, so going from, my background is in marketing, and I kind of was like climbing the ladder in that space, going from like a marketing director to actually like running a lifestyle platform, having all these, people reporting up to me and everything like that. And I just reached a point where I didn't know that it was really for me. I was like, one, like, is this really my purpose? Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? And then two, the way that I was being asked to do it didn't really sit well with me. And I was like, it was in a way where I couldn't show up as my full self because I was like, that's not really how I want to do things, but how I'm told to be doing things, all of that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to dive back into like creative work. Growing up, I was always, the girl who was, I don't know, I had like my walls were covered with like my drawings and paintings and like
my creative spirit.
Super, from day one. Like my dad would be looking for his hammer and his he's like, where are my hammer? I'm like, I don't have your hammer. He's like, so that's not my hammer? And I'm like, yes. So that's my identity and my family's like that creative person. And so I wanted to jump back into that and it felt right. And I was like, yes. Here's where the ego comes in. So when you go from, having your own team and people reporting up to you, jumping into a new space and you're kind of like starting from the bottom and you got to climb your way up. And so I like knew that like conceptually, but the reality of it was different, and I stayed in the same company. I didn't, it wasn't like a whole fresh new start in a new place. It was the same place. So I had to really struggle to be like, oh, like I used to be telling you what to do and now here you are telling me what to do. And that was tough. That was really, really tough. It was a humbling moment. It was a moment of even reflection to be like, okay, I made this big decision. Now that I'm living in it, was that the right decision, And so I've had to check myself. I've had to check other people. I've had to check my purpose in so many different ways. And so that was the biggest sacrifice was letting go of that. I thought it was going to be easy. When I was doing it, when I made the choice, I was like, whatever, this is the best for me. I'm going to do this. But then the actual reality of it, whoa, I wasn't necessarily ready for it. And once I realized that, and then that moment of checking myself and being like, okay, girl, like, do you need to let go of this ego right now because it's not helping you right now? It's not,
you don't have a place here.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It does not have a place here. So that was the biggest sacrifice, letting that go and choosing to just move on. Like you said, well, this is where you are now, and it doesn't have a place here, so you got to let it go.
That's an important, I've been... the ego, it's just like a huge, it takes up space in all these different realms of our lives, right? Like the workplace, the relationships, friendships, and self. Yeah. Like, whew. I don't know, all the thoughts are coming because I definitely relate to having to just check it, right? Your ego will be out there roaming and you're like, hold on, bring it on. Right.
But also sometimes too, because I think, ego kind of gets its bad rep, that you're always having to check in and reel it in. And yeah, there's times where you have to do that. But I also think, specifically as Black women, a lot of the times that, if we do have ego, it's, we get all these other labels for it. She got an attitude, she's a B, she's this, she's that, whatever it might be. So that's why I mentioned there are times where I had to check other people as well. And it had to be, I try to be graceful when I check people. It's not about...
Those are the best kind of checkings. I mean,
Right,
do it with grace.
do it all with grace. And I try to remind myself that it's not about putting them down, but setting my boundaries.
Yes.
And like, that's how I approach it. So it doesn't come off like, because a lot of times if you're, they can get really defensive, and I can understand that. If somebody trying to check me, I'm like, excuse you, Right. But it's all about your approach. But I do want to point out that like, ego is great too, and you should be proud about the things that you've done and be able to speak to it and stand strong in all the things that you've done. So it can be a great thing too. And I think a lot of times, like I said, as Black women, we're kind of put in this box, or if we have an ego, or if we're proud about what we do, people are like, oh, she being too much, she being this, she being whatever. No, I'm owning what I've done, and I'm proud about it. So own your stuff too. Like,
I think there's definitely that line, like, between, because it doesn't really serve anyone when the ego is just like, I don't know if pretentious is the right word, but there's no ownership for the entire thing. It's like only the good stuff, which we were kind of talking about a little bit. If you're gonna show up and there's gonna be some ego there, you gotta have the whole thing. Is your shit together? Are you handling business on the left and the right side? And but that line where the ego stops serving its purpose is where that's the conversation I've been trying to unpack. Like, where is, whether it's a disagreement, an argument, whatever, workplace, home life, there's times when that ego like appears, and it's like a healthy habit to recognize ego, because I think a lot of times we just think this is just how we are and this is how we interact, but a lot of times it's like, no, actually ego creeped in here, and so you're misunderstanding me, I'm not really understanding you. Something here is, there's like a mirror changing the way messages are being construed, and intentions are being whatever. But anyway, the ego, all of that. But I'm here for this.
Yeah, that was deep. I didn't expect, because the ego is there for a reason, and I think it's a little bit of protection. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be solid in who you are, and that's the only way that you're going to propel yourself forward and live in your purpose and be guided by whatever higher being it is that you believe in, right? But from a psychological perspective, the ego comes with two other things: the id, and I think it's a super ego. I don't know, but there's like the id, the ego, and then the other thing. So that implies that you have to find balance between these different parts of yourself, and on top of that, you have to learn how to interact with other people who also have three different parts of themselves, or however many other parts of themselves, so that's super important. And I think that when you find yourself in battle with the ego, that's you on the verge of a radical transformation. Absolutely. In my opinion, because when you can notice that there's a part of you that you can't really control, when you at least can recognize it, you're like, oh wow, when I can master that part of myself, that's when I'm gonna be on the next level.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of my favorite words in like the existence of words is balance. That is one of my favorite words, and I am still, in everything that I do, I say I'm still a work in progress. But balance was something that I think it helped me with that battle that you're talking about. When you realize sort of the other things at play within yourself and then with everybody else, I think I was really frustrated by that, because I was like, well, I see this, or I recognize this, or I would do things this way. Why don't you? And the idea of balance kind of helped me reconcile that. It helped me figure out that, okay, well, if I'm this way, then there's going to be a counter to it. There's going to be something opposite to it or different to it when dealing with like other people.
Right.
And that's been something that's helped me in a lot of different relationships that I've had, even helping me to understand other people. Like, okay, if I think you're a complete whatever one day and the next day you're like an angel, I'm like, well, that's the world balancing out, you know? That's sort of like a really generalized way to think about it or talk about it, but I don't know, it's just one of those things in life that has helped me really slow down and like see and recognize what's happening. Is trying to if you can see both ends, and I don't think not all things exist on like this like spectrum of two ends, but if you can kind of see both ends, it gets you to the beginning of being able to see it all, to like see everything in between as well. So yeah, you just brought that up, and I was like, that is one of my favorite words. I use it for everything. Like, I'll be like, balance. That's my answer.
That's the answer. See, and as you're talking about that, because I think my theme, I don't know if it's for this quarter or for this time of the year, I don't know, but lately, and as I'm looking ahead, understanding is actually like a huge theme for me right now. And so, the highest form of love is understanding, because we don't have to agree. Like, my belief, there really isn't a right and a wrong. We have reasons, and it's your perspective, and it's your experience, and it's how you're receiving something or viewing something that you then react or act on whatever it is. And so if you and I are in this circumstance or conversation or whatever, like talking about something or something that took place, I'm gonna have my perspective, my experience with that. When you actually want to understand that, that's like, I think that's like the highest elevated way of operating, right, with other people. And I guess even with yourself. That just made me,
You hitting so many, oh my God, it's so amazing to me how we're all experiencing the same thing but defining it in different ways. And when I hear your guys' definition, it helps me understand myself even so much more. Because I didn't realize, how do I put this? Recently I found out I was crazy. I figured out that I am low-key insane. Like, how can you be happy at 5 o'clock? By 5:25, you like, fuck this shit. Like, it's just the amounts of emotions that I experience within a day, let alone a week or a month, or it's crazy. And
it's not crazy.
But I did not used to have that much awareness about myself, And so now that I do, it's made me much more gentle with other people, because we're all, it's the same things inside. But it's the same underlying issue that was pulled one way or another based upon our circumstances. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, if ego has a spectrum, or if pain has a spectrum,
all the things,
or if worry, doubt, if all of those have a spectrum based on, your experiences in life, at any given time, you're either on the positive, neutral, negative part of the spectrum. So it's just made me just be way more gentle with people, and like you're saying, had way more understanding for why people can, come at me or just
all of it. But that's, I think it was yesterday, I was talking about something, and then I guess I don't even remember actually thinking it, but as I said, well, I understand how they kind of, and I was like, well damn, I guess I do understand how they would, why they're like this, right? Like, in processing and being able, but you got to be willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Like, look, when you know better, you do better. I think that's 100. When you don't know, you don't know, you don't know. So you can't even, it's not even like, oh, well, I'm not doing that. You just don't even know to consider, right, these experiences that we all have. We might all, I don't know, go out to a restaurant and this waiter does some crazy off the wall shit. Like, I don't know, slammed a plate down and a drink and just had a crazy attitude. We're going to experience that differently. I might be triggered by something that just happened to me a minute ago because the situation is similar, and then something else happened that was traumatic or, hurt, whatever. It could be anything. I could be triggered in that moment. Meanwhile, Sabine could be like, he's probably having the craziest day.
Right.
And you don't have any specific triggers. You're able to let it kind of roll off. Marissa, you might just be like, man, fuck this dude. What is he doing? Like that's out of pocket, but it's not, you're not experiencing it the same way. And I think it's easier to be understanding when you're going through the things together.
Yeah, right.
So like, yeah, versus having interactions like in the workplace or with strangers, it's not an automatic thing to want to understand what got them to that moment, the way it did. It's not automatic.
Right. I'm gonna bring balance back into this too, because I like to always look at the other end, right? I talked about if you can see both ends, right? So I think everything you're saying is so important. These are lessons that I learned like mostly in college when I was like, I don't know, it was the first time I was, I'm the youngest, so it was the first time I was away from like my family and all the rules and everything and doing my own thing. And I mean, for a lot of people, that is when you really discover what are the things that matter to you, right? Because growing up, your family, your friends, your church, your whatever, like they kind of guided your values and what were the things that are important to you for most people. And so being away from all of that, you develop your own values and your own, okay, this is how I want to live my life and these are the things that matter to me. And so as you're talking about that, I'm someone who very often, and my friends can attest to this, I'm sure I embarrass some of them, I get into debates with strangers, okay? If we're out, we could be at a bar, everybody having a good time. If you say something out of pocket, I'm coming for you, And it's not always just like kind of ripping you a new one, and like everybody's at the bar like, dang girl, it was a joke, or we was just trying to have fun, or whatever it might be. The things I've heard, So, but when you think about it, I've kind of always been afflicted with I say afflicted, but I've always kind of had that thing in the back of my head that made me think about, okay, well, if I was in this other person's shoes, how would I feel? Or like, if what's their perspective on it? Right. And so sometimes I can see it as it's helped me. It's benefited me a lot. It's helped me to have understanding. It's helped me to, just be a more compassionate, generous person, which is something I value. So it's helped me in those ways. But in other ways, it's kind of held me back or like made me a little bit more, maybe a little too understanding, at times where I should be putting up boundaries, at times where it's like, nah, that really wasn't okay. Yeah. I always have that voice in the back of my head, well, they were probably going through this or probably going through that, which is still very valid. It's still very real. Sure. And when I was a little bit younger, I might not have approached it right. Like in my head, I'm like, well, nah, like what you said wasn't okay. And that's how it would come out. And what I've learned to do is to take that voice, to take that little voice that helps me understand and to use it to help me communicate better and to communicate more effectively. Because if I can understand where you're coming from, then I can actually communicate with you. A lot of times, people see communication as just what they say, but or like, oh, I said words to you, that's communication. Right. That's not communication. Right. Communication is actually the understanding between two people. Because if I say something to you in Creole and you don't know what I'm saying, that was not communication. You didn't understand me. You didn't receive what I gave, the message. You didn't receive the message. It's not actually effective communication. And so that's what I've tried to use that sort of understanding to do is to, okay, this person says something crazy out of pocket at the bar, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, well, let me see. It's, white boy Sean, it's normally white boy Sean. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe he's coming from a place where he's not interacting with a lot of black people or a lot of black women or whatever it might be. I'm also trying to take into account, okay, maybe white boy Sean's had a couple of drinks. He's, just saying whatever comes to his mind. He doesn't have that filter anymore. I try to take all these things into account, but I still put up my boundary. I still let you know. One of my favorite phrases, my friend told me I should put it on a shirt. So if anybody wants to put it on a shirt and send it to me, I'll pay you. He told me, he's like, one of my favorite phrases, that was rude, but I will tell you what you said is rude. I do say, I was like, he told me that and I was like, you know what? I do say that all the time. But it's my way of, letting you know what you said wasn't okay. That was rude. I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna be straight up. That was rude.
Yeah.
It's not super aggressive, but it also isn't passive. It's also not just gonna let you get away with it. So I'll be like, that was rude. Pause. But, and then maybe answer your question or dive into whatever. So I think there's that other end of it to the understanding because, and again, as black women, I'm a black woman. That's how I move through the world. We have a lot of understanding for a lot of people.
Yep.
We got understanding for black folk. We got understanding for women, for children. Like, we be understanding all over the place.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't take the time to understand us. And so I do feel it's my duty a lot of the times to let you know. I'm not gonna do it in a way that creates friction, because a lot of times, especially if you're just like out in a bar or something like that, you know what I mean? Like if you're in my home and we having a conversation, that's a different thing. We can get into it, and I like to get into it. But if we're out and about, I'm just gonna let you know. I just feel like I'm doing you and me a disservice. I'm doing everyone a disservice if I'm simply understanding and don't take that next step to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other end of it, Like, yes, be understanding. Try to understand where people are coming from. Put yourself in their shoes. Try to see all the elements that are at play. Don't drive yourself crazy, but, try to have that awareness, but also be accountable. Whether that's yourself, if you said something out of pocket and you're like, you know what? You were right. My bad, you know? Or if it's somebody else, let them know as well. That understanding can help you communicate it in a way that doesn't automatically turn into a fight, that doesn't automatically turn defensive, where like, dang, okay, now you're defensive, now you're whatever. Communication can't even happen anymore.
Can't even exist.
Right. So.
No, that's real. I think the boundaries is just a thing, right? Like, we need to do that more. It's easy to forget. Like you said, being a black woman, we kind of look after ourselves last. And so those boundaries, it's tricky because you're not used to putting up boundaries.
I've got a thought.
Okay, bring the thought.
I got the thought. So I feel like all of sort of just this talk of like boundaries and accountability and balance and everything, it actually brings me back to like, I mentioned, like in college was when I really started to figure out like what mattered to me and all of that. And the big thing that happened in college that kind of really started me on that path was getting involved with spoken word poetry. And that is really where, I've always been a creative person, like I told you, stealing my dad's hammer, buttons, all that. But that was really where I found my voice. And where creative expression became meaningful to me. Before it was just sort of, I think it was always meaningful to me, but I was doing it with intention now. Before it was just like,
It was fun.
It was fun, right? Exactly. I was just sort of drawn to it without necessarily doing it with a purpose in mind. And when I got involved with poetry, you know, in college it was about like, we would do like either open mics or whatever, but the big thing was like poetry slams.
Yes.
You go, it's a competition. It's really just a trick to get you in the room to hear poetry, but people like a competition.
Yeah.
So that was something that, and I had really great friends and mentors some who'd actually been doing it for like 10 plus years and things like that, who really helped guide me and guide my voice. And I don't know, I like sort of blossomed as a storyteller. And that's really where my storyteller journey began. And I was able to see that my story mattered. And that, and I'm a big proponent of only telling my story. If you ever look at my poetry or like hear it, whatever, I tell my story. And so many people have told me they can relate to it and such. And that's real because, like you said, a lot of us are going through the same thing. It just sounds different. It feels different. But once you hear somebody talking about it, you're like, I actually know what that is. Or that, you know, like I'm actually going through the same. Right. Same, sis. Same. But yeah, that's where creative expression became this. It became a powerful thing for me. I was like, oh, not only can I get on stage, they give you 3 minutes. I can get on stage. Y'all all gonna listen and look at me for 3 minutes and, you know, mostly silence, but if people like what you're saying, they'll snap, they do whatever, you know, and tell my story. And that's my space. It's mine. Nobody else can interrupt it. Nobody else can tell me it's not real, that it doesn't matter, that you know, that I'm talking too much, I'm taking up too much space, whatever it might be. And I loved it. Yeah. I really owned that. And sometimes even I'd get off stage and almost like I wouldn't actually remember being on stage. I was like in a different place. And that was a spark for me of creative expression. And I wish I had gotten into it so much younger. I was like, oh, all those things I was going through in high school and the feelings I had and thinking I was crazy, whatever it might be. I was like, I wish I'd had this outlet, or even, it doesn't necessarily have to be poetry, but, you know, even have that intention, understand that all the creative things I was doing, I could have used as an outlet. And then as I get older, I'm like, oh, like seeing how it impacts other people and how other people relate to that story. So that's where, you know, that's where my journey as a storyteller started. That's where creative expression became, it was like my lifeline. It really saved my life. One of my favorite quotes from Toni Morrison is, and excuse me if I don't say it verbatim, but it's having freedom is one thing, claiming ownership of that freedom is another. Being free is just one step. Claiming that freedom, like when I got to college and I didn't have parents telling me what to do, and you know, I grew up in a very like restrictive household, so you know, I won't lie, first I went a little wild freshman year. I was doing whatever. I was like, you know what? I don't got nobody telling me when to come home, all of that. But it actually made me feel even more lost. It made me feel even more like scattered. And I was like, what am I doing? Do I want to do this because I want to, or just because I can? And so claiming that freedom as your own, as what you want it to be. Oh, that's a whole nother level. And that's what like that creative process did for me. I got to finally own that freedom that I had.
And happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
But, wow.
My God. So many things. I'm thinking like claiming that space of literally being free. Oh.
It just sparks so many things inside me. I don't even know where to begin.
Right.
But it is reminding me of literally today. I was listening to an interview that Common did. You know, he got a book out now, so he on a toll. But anyway,
he'll be at the podcast soon. It's fine.
Yes, Common, come through.
We would have a good ass conversation with Common. We're literally talking about everything he was talking about. but he really was. He talked about this idea of how, like, you know, many of us in this generation come from parents who are like, you do what I say and that's it. You know, like you don't necessarily have room to express yourself. And as you were talking, the question that came to my mind was like, how are we even defining creativity? Because I feel like it's a word now. It's a word. Mm-hmm. Like everybody know what that means, but I don't. When I was a kid, I don't think I've ever used the word creative. I'm really trying to think back. Prior to even in college, I never considered myself creative. That was never the thing for me. Mm-hmm. The thing for me was like, I almost felt like I was just like a super workaholic, which maybe I could still identify as that. But I always felt like
yes,
a little bit. I mean,
but I was always trying to dig myself out of this thing, which present day Marissa can look at that feeling and say that, I was struggling to figure out where I fit in the world because I was different from the people I spent the most time with, which was my family, Right. And so I was trying to express these things that I identified with, which was really just trying to have ownership, you know what I mean, of myself, of other things, of whatever. And I expressed that by just overcommitting to any opportunity that was in front of me. And it ain't matter what it was. I was going to take it and make it something like, and, now I'm kind of at a point where I'm like trying to think through like, what do I actually care about? Right. What do I actually want to put that hustle energy into? Because it can't be everything. It can't. And when I think about how I'm expressing myself creatively present day, I still don't know. I still don't know if I identify with the whole creative movement right now, because I think that I always got an answer to something. Like, I don't know, we might have been talking about this before we started recording, but just like, if something goes wrong, taking ownership of that, and then also just finding a solution. Like, I feel like I've just always been a person to just, all right, well, if this ain't gonna work, then we gotta. But I think where that actually comes from is I never wanted to get in trouble. And so if it was,
I gotta make this work.
Yeah, so I never wanted to get in trouble. So I would always figure out a way to like spit it. It's nothing's going wrong here. Okay, just everyone relax. But even that comes from a place of fear and worry, which is a whole other concept that I've had to conquer. So, it's just, I want to put the question out there because maybe there's other people who feel like they aren't creative. And I feel like that's a thing that people say, like, everyone's creative. But it's like, get the fuck out of here. If I said I don't feel creative, then, so I don't know. It's weird because I don't necessarily know if that's the right word to that I would identify with, but like expression in general. I think I have many forms of doing that. But when you started getting into poetry, did you feel like that was creative? Did you have a name for creativity? Was that a thing, basically?
Yeah. I want to make a point that, because you mentioned, I'm going to answer the question, but creative or creativity has definitely taken on a whole new thing, especially with social media. It's become a whole nother space. And I just spoke at Summit 21, and I moderated a talk with Alex Wolf, and we talked a lot about that sort of shift in the space and thinking about how to be a creative in that space and not lose yourself in there, and and I will say, and I'm going to reference back Toni Morrison and claiming your freed self. You are whatever you say you are. That's a song. What is that? I am whatever I say I am. I think so. I think it is. But and that's something I had to. So when I first got into poetry, to get back to your question, I really shied away from being called a creative. I was like, even people calling me a poet, I was like, nah, I just read poems. I ain't a poet though. You know, I was like, I didn't want people calling me that because, and even to this day, I still fall into that pattern. Like, I had lunch with a friend today who's a fellow visual designer, and she was like, if you don't start just telling people you a visual designer, own that.
Yeah.
Like, and she made me practice with her. She's like, so Sabine, what do you do? And I was like, I'm a visual designer. Like, I'm practicing it, you know? And even that small step, that's something you can do, you know? But getting familiar with, you're going to feel crazy at first, like, you know, whether it's friends or you're looking in the mirror practicing, you're going to feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, I'm weird. What am I doing? But it really does, you get comfortable, you get familiar with it, and it becomes easier over time. And if it's something that you do, and if something that you're like, you know what, even if you're like, I'm not a creative, but you know, I express myself in all these other ways, whatever your, I don't know, whatever you feel you are. I'm trying to think of the word, like whatever your title is, like, for lack of a better term, but whatever your title is, whatever you want to own, you know, like when I tell people I'm a storyteller, people be like, oh, where are your books at? And I'm like, no. Let me tell you what I mean when I say I'm a storyteller. And that was an identity. There you go. Identity that you own, you know, that was an identity. Instead of being called, I didn't like being called a poet. I just felt like it didn't fit me exactly. You know, so I was like, I'm a storyteller, and that's my identity. That's what I felt right for me, and that's how I identify myself. And can't nobody tell me I'm not. You know what I mean? I tell you who I am. So I think that's a really great exercise. Anyone who's struggling, being like, yo,
this is a good message. Like, for real.
Yeah.
So everybody.
You can do whatever you want to do with yourself.
Yeah.
First
Absolutely.
of all, like,
even at work, I was like, I'm in a little bit of a battle right now, but I'm like, I want to make up my own title. I think I do a lot of different things, and yes, I'm a visual designer. I have a marketing background. I do a lot of that. I used to run operations. I've you know, done set design. I've been the person behind the camera. I've done a lot of different things. So I'm like, well, I don't think visual designer encompasses everything that I am and that I do. And so I'm fighting for that, you know? And I think for me, the fight alone is enough. Even if I don't end up with whatever title I'm looking for, I think just fighting for my identity. And I think so many people can relate to that across the board, you know, whether you are a creative, whether you're a Black woman, because again, that's how I moved through the world, and you know, whether you're part of the LGBTQ community, whatever, like everyone is fighting for their identities right now, and I think that's an important fight, and keep fighting it. Don't let nobody tell you who you are. Like, I know who I am, I tell you, and even if you're still on that journey of figuring out who you are, that's okay. I'm still a work in progress. Tomorrow I could be like, you know what, I'm not a storyteller no more, I'm a poet.
I mean, technically, we learned this on the last episode with Soko, that like the struggle never ends, it only changes, you know? Right. So we're gonna forever be evolving, and I have to remind myself, I only have good days when I am in the mind space of like, look, it just is what it is. Don't try to give it a name, give it barriers, give it definitions, because that's when you get tripped up, because once you do that and you perhaps find yourself, perhaps when you define it and then you don't mess it up to those definitions or those expectations or whatever, then it starts this whole other thing that you have to deal with within yourself, right? So I think what I've always admired about you is exactly what you're saying. Like, you're like, well, no, this is who I am, and that's the fuck I said, nigga. Like,
I said what I said.
She never says it like that, but you know, it's
almost like that.
Yeah. And so I just admire that so much, because sometimes what I've learned is when I disagree with people, especially when people try to tell me about myself and I disagree with you, I'm not even gonna argue with you. I'm gonna be like, okay. And in my mind, I'm gonna just take that and just go, because I'm not very good at like having a discussion with someone about why we have a difference of opinion. I'm not good at that. I'm not good at it. So
I drag it out of you in our rare exchanges.
I just kind of be like, all right, cool.
Don't want to talk about it.
And that can be good or bad.
It can definitely be good or bad.
Because sometimes it's good in the sense I take what you're saying and I'm like, all right, I'm going to adjust the way I move. And then sometimes it's bad where it's like, all right, bitch, you just wait. Just wait. So I'm working on that, but I definitely, I strive to be at a place where I know myself so well that if I am in a situation where I disagree with somebody on any cause, on any case, I'm okay with walking away from that, potentially having to separate from that relationship or
Put distance.
I've
had to do that for sure.
I'm okay with that. And I think a lot of times I'm like, oh, if I say what I really want to say, it might bring the whole house down.
Well, sometimes the house need to be brought down.
Sometimes just take a beat.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say. Take a beat. And what I never be afraid to like come back later. Sometimes you be in the middle of something and you're like, you don't have a good comeback. And then like that night and you sit in your room, you like, man, I should have said this, It's okay to come back later and be like, hey, so
about
that thing, or can we have a conversation? Sometimes I had to, so I'm kind of the opposite. Like I'll go off on people. I told y'all. So I had to learn to take that beat, take a minute, calm down. Like don't approach it from a place of anger or, for me it was mostly anger, but don't approach it from the place where, I don't know, where it's going to make you feel, for me, it was like out of control. Like I felt like I wasn't in control of it. I would just like lash out. But, I've done this personal relationships, work relationships, friendships. I've done this, in all the spaces of my life. I try to, if I can't respond in the moment the way I want to, I try to like take a beat, think about it. Sometimes I'll even, this is another exercise for y'all. I'm big on exercises. Write it out. That thing, write out your angry letter. Don't send it out, but write it all out. Because even for me, a lot of it was, and again, this is something like all forms of creative expression have helped me figure out. I'll be feeling something, but I don't know what it is I'm feeling.
Right.
It's so much. Like I said, I do everything at 150. So I'll be like, if I'm angry, I'm angry all the way. If I'm sad, I'm sad all the way.
Right.
And so I'd be so full of it that I couldn't really even, for me, sometimes I couldn't even identify what the emotion I was feeling. I just know I'm feeling something. So if I give myself that beat, if I write it out, if I, whatever your form is, if you sing it out. If you dance it out. Whatever it might be, give you that time to process it. And then I'd be like, oh, I thought it was anger, but I was actually insecure about what was happening in the situation. And then that way I can go approach, if I feel I still need to like say something, I can go approach that person and be like, hey, so, do you have a minute? I just want to talk to you about what had happened, express how I feel, and then give them the moment to respond back. And that way, again, you're approaching it from a place where, and this has taken a lot of practice, let me tell you. I used to just, I could tell you so many stories, but, like, it's just gotten me to the place where I can now, a lot of times in the moment, even if I don't actually know what the thing is in the moment, I know like, this don't sit right. So I'll say my little, that was rude, but, or, whatever comes out, or even sometimes I'll just tell somebody like, that made me uncomfortable,
But being able to say and express that, like the why, right? Like you can be mad about something, but if you can't really process it because the anger is so, or the hurt even is so elevated in that moment,
right?
You take time to process, then you can actually understand what caused you to even, like you said, maybe it was something else, the insecurity. Then you can go back and communicate that.
Right.
Like, now I'm not just saying, like, oh, you made me mad. You made me mad because, and this is something that I understand about myself. And if I can express that to you, you either not going to give a fuck or you are.
Right.
And that's going to allow me to see where we stand, you know, whether that's the respect level you have for me, the sincerity.